Hello out there, and today we have the first knife review of the new year on this channel, and I'm excited because it is a pretty darn good one. This is the Nutcracker from Steel Will, and as you guys might have known if you watched my top 10 knives of 2020 video, the Scylla here from Steel Will as well was my favorite knife of the year last year, and then 2 years ago, 2019, we had the Shaola, which was my favorite knife of the year then. And so, hey, I said I was going to get more Steel Wills. This one came courtesy of the Apex Pass Around group, and it's one that I really wish I could keep instead of passing on to the next person because it is no surprise on my end, but it is a pretty darn well-made knife, and I like it a lot. So today we're going to go through all the details that you need to know, do some comparisons, and talk about one or two small and then one pretty big thing about this knife that is holding me back about it. But again, the general overall vibe about this on my end is very, very positive. So we'll get into some of those, some negatives in just a bit, but let's start with some size comparisons here. Is the Paramilitary 2. You can see a much longer cutting edge on the Steel Will, longer overall with the PM2, as we've come to know. That's just the way things are with that blade to handle ratio. But the Steel Will, the Nutcracker, has about a 3.5 inch cutting edge, almost perfectly right there. And then overall, we're looking at almost right at 8 inches. So it feels and seems like a bigger knife right off the bat than it actually is. And so I sort of like that because you can take a look at it and you're thinking, all right, this is a pretty darn big one. And no, it isn't. It just sort of has that feeling at first. But then once you start to use it and get it in hand, you know, it feels a lot like, you know, a lot of other things that are out there. So, you know, putting it next to the 943, almost the exact same overall length, bringing in a couple, I think, better like overall size comparisons. The Cold Steel Airlight is a really good one. All right, those line up almost perfectly as far as blade length and overall length. And then the last one here, we're going to do the ZT0393, which is a little bit longer overall, but you can see that cutting edge is pretty comparable. So it's sort of in the same vein where, yeah, it's a full-size knife, but I don't know, like I said, I just had this this little bit of an idea that it was going to be a more of a tank than it is. And, you know, it has that design where it could be, but no, it's really not that long. 4.59 ounces on this, 4.6. So it isn't the most lightweight knife, but we have nested liners with the G10. It does have some thick G10 scales and a pretty thick blade stock too, so that's where you're going to get that weight. The weight is not a negative whatsoever for a knife this size. It's just fine at 4.6 ounces. Let's take a look at the blade and some of those details there. What we have is a blade of N690 steel, so I guess you'd consider that an upgrade over the D2 that they use on a lot of their things. A number of companies, I guess, are making this transition to N690. I'm not 100% sure why. I mean, I've never had a problem with the steel, that or N680. They're different, but N690 is just fine. I think the Kaiser Vanguard series is using it as well, and that's great. But as far as a noticeable difference between this and D2 in performance, I've never really seen it. You know, if there's other variations in the design or the grind of a knife, that I'll notice that before I'll notice a difference between N690 and, say, D2. The grind on this knife, though, it starts pretty high. It is flat. It ends up being pretty thin, so, you know, it does cut pretty darn well. I really like the blade shape. It has this all-purpose utilitarian kind of shape, almost like a sheep's foot, but with a little bit of belly here. So there's a few knives that, God, I was trying to remember, guys. I was trying to remember what this reminded me of, and I just dug through every knife in my collection, and I couldn't figure it out. I just couldn't find the knife. Maybe I don't own it anymore, but I know that I had a knife that had a blade shape just like this, and yeah, I mean, it's a good one. So if you're getting a knife for, you know, utility tasks or just general purpose EDC, maybe something a little bit harder used than, you know, one of those smaller EDCs that tend to be popular, then this would be a pretty good one. As we move on back, you'll notice there's no jimping on the spine of the knife, but there is right here before you get to the blade. So is this jimping functional? Yeah, it's It's fine. I mean, there's a lot of cutting that can be done in this like hand grip configuration. For me personally, I'm sliding up a little bit and sliding. There's not a deep enough depression here for you to get any real traction here, but the knife is comfortable in hand, like very, very comfortable. So when you're cutting with it, like the lack of jimping up on the spine isn't a negative in actual use. All right, guys, I wanted to show you this Nutcracker in action, just so you can get an idea of what it looks like in hand as you're cutting with it. Just a little bit of, understanding. The cardboard that I have here is super wet just because we had some rain last night. Very humid down here in Florida. So let's just see what happens here. You can see, sort of tough to start the cut, but, and as I was saying with the ergos, I'm sort of choking up past that jimping. But I mean, the knife is ground pretty thin, sliding through stuff. I mean, this cardboard it's like mush, but with the grain of it still slicing pretty well. Ripping a little bit there, but sort of to be expected. That's really not a bad thing. Then as we move on back, you can see these G10 scales. I believe this comes in a black as well as a gray. The gray is just super attractive, and when I look at the G10, it's just very nicely done. And I don't know, I'm a guy who, I'm not particularly picky when it comes to materials. You guys probably know that, but I do like the expression of materials when you get them at their finest. And Steel Will last year, even on the Scylla, this is decent G10, but it's not anything quite that fancy. Pretty much like Spyderco Tenacious G10. And the year before with the Shaolet, it had this like nice pattern, which I really enjoyed. Just that extra level of detail, all those points of contact machined nicely. This one is almost like a matte finish, but with a ton of texture. It's like not coarse texture, but you can see all that texturing, and I just really like it. It's a nice looking piece of G10, and it feels good in hand, and it's grippy, and yeah, it serves a lot of purposes. And I think that this is just one of those knives that, I mean, like I said before, it's one that you're going to be able to use and use pretty hard, and it's durable, but it also has this like ultra classy kind of look and feel to it, even though it is a little bit maybe larger knife than most people would consider to be a gent piece. So yeah, just my take, and the G10 is a big part of that. One other thing, as we talk about being like overbuilt and built for use, I really, really like that we have T8 screws all the way across the board. Some knives just have it on the pivot. Some knives are good enough to do it on the body screws as well. This knife goes all the way with it and has it on the pocket clip screw additionally. So very rarely do you see that. So T8 all the way across the board, even on the pocket clip. So I just like that. I don't really see the purpose of the smaller screws. They just tend to be a nuisance more than anything else. And I don't know, maybe it's incorrect to get this kind of feeling, but I just have this great sturdy, this great warm and fuzzy feeling that this is a nice sturdy knife when I look and see the T8 hardware. And yeah, when we get to how the lockup is and that construction, then you'll see that definitely plays true. Now, continuing to look at the scales and the interior here, we do have nested liners in the G10. There's no interior like milling, no weight relief on those liners, but like I said, that weight relief is in the G10, so it sort of is a wash. It's good. It makes it look super good and classy. So again, definitely a positive thing. Now, as we move on back and we take a look at the clip is not going to be everybody's favorite, right? I mean, a lot of people don't like milled clips. What I can say about this one is that it carries actually really well. It's not reversible, which is going to be a bummer for a number of people. But yeah, for what it is, it works just fine. Could it be a little bit deeper, especially if they had gone with a different style clip? Possibly, but at least there's no lanyard hole interfering with where it's carrying, and it could be worse than it is what I'm saying. So it's not great, but it's not terrible. And one of the things that is really quite good about the knife is this accent pop right here. for some reason, this little stuff does a lot for me. When there's just that little burst of color, Benchmade tends to do it really well on some of their knives, and a lot of companies are sort of getting on board. And so what we have is a little pop of red with these standoffs, and it's nice. And then your lanyard would go through these standoffs if you're going to use one. Perfect. You know, don't interfere with the lines of the knife. Anyone who wants to put a lanyard on this thing can. Everybody wins. I don't see why this isn't the way every single knife is. All right, so that is the general overview of the look of the knife. When we get into the lockup and the construction, it is like pretty close to flawless. I mean, this knife feels very, very sturdy, very durable. I can't really get any kind of wiggle on it at all. The liner lock engagement is excellent. So Steel Will has done a very good job, I think, with that. And so again, you have that multifaceted kind of feel to this design, in that, you know, it looks like a knife that could be a beater. It feels like a knife that could be a beater, but the expression of these materials makes it look a little bit more high-end than that. So that's really good. All right, as far as the action, it's sort of what you expect. At this point with Steel Will, I expect good action, and it's pretty darn good. You know, it flips really nicely, nice and snappy, drops shut pretty darn well. I mean, there is a good amount of weight in the blade, so you can expect that. So that's sort of the way that goes. So let's take a closer look at that as well.
And now for 30 seconds of non-stop, unadulterated Nutcracker action. All right.
Yeah, guys. So, I mean, here you have it. This knife checks a lot of boxes, a whole lot of boxes. I mean, the only little nitpicky things that I would correct or change if it were me, you know, taking a look at it, maybe add a little bit of jimping, even though it's not that big of a deal, and adjust the clip. But again, just for what I need and the way that I carry, that clip was just fine. You know, there's so many great things about this knife and the blade shape, and yeah, just a number of really good qualities. So let's talk about the one negative, and it's not really anything to do with the knife at all. The one negative, the one big thing that's holding me back from just jumping all over the endorsement here, is the price point. I didn't know what the price of this knife was when I unboxed it. I hadn't looked it up. I knew nothing about this knife except for the fact that it looked cool and I wanted to get my hands on it. That's why I signed up to get this in the pass round. So I'm thinking about this knife, thinking about doing this review and what I'm going to say. And I was like, man, this knife is a potential like best value of the year, because, you know, I'm looking at all the materials and everything that's going on with it, and assuming that it's going to be priced the way that the Shaola was and the way that the Scylla was last year, you know, $55, $60. I figured that would be the price range that would be in. And maybe if it's a couple bucks more, I understand that, because, you know, it is a different steel that maybe people want a little bit more than D2. And we do have this pop of color and nested liner. So there's, you know, a little bit more here. I was surprised then to see that this is a $110 knife. $110 is, it's, you know, it's not a super expensive knife compared to a lot of other things. And like the comparisons that we did, you know, earlier, obviously I have knives of that price point. And, you know, I'm comfortable spending that much when a knife is that good, but I was just surprised. I was shocked that it wasn't on the same level as the Shaola here, at least, because the Shaola is as good a knife as this, without a doubt. You know, again, if you're one of those people who hates D2 and the N690 is that much better for you, then you'll see the value there. And maybe there's some value in the difference in the G10 between these two knives. Maybe there's some value in the material on the clip, maybe the nested liners. Again, there's a number of things that one person could look at this knife and point to it and say that this is why it's a more expensive knife. But for me, when I do all of that math and that analysis, it's hard for me to rationalize like an extra $50, say, than what this cost a couple years ago. That's just me. Now, at the end of the day, what I've always been saying, what I always come back to is, if you really like this knife, if you take a look at this model and you say, this is the knife that I have to have, and you spend your $110 on it, even though you wish that it was a $60 or $70 knife, I think that you're going to get your value back at the end of the day, because it's that good of a build and that good of a construction. And I think that this is really Steel Will just like gambling on that. They're gambling on people giving it a chance and really understanding that this is a well-made knife, even at the price of $110. It is just a little bit of a surprise, because it is not what I expect when, I see a knife with, this type of material from them. I'm expecting it to be in this category, and I wasn't aware that we were like, boop, jumping up. So the Nutcracker, at the end of the day, I think it's a big win. It's a good knife from Steel Will, but it's just one that, if you're going to make that investment in it, you got to be sure, because once you get into that $100 plus ballpark, there's a lot of other competition as well. So make sure that it's the one that you want. But yeah, if you look at this knife the way that I do and you like it, then you'll probably end up enjoying it. And this knife will be on my list to hopefully come back to in the future and get in my collection. So any questions, comments, complaints, suggestions, let me know about it. Thanks very much, guys. I really appreciate you watching. Take care and have a good one.